I'm sure you heard the old joke, what do you call someone who speaks 3 languages? Trilingual. What do you call someone who speaks 2 languages? Bilingual. What do you call someone who speaks 1 language? American. Languages can be tough. I have no facility with languages. I had 6 years of Latin, 4 years of Greek, 2 years of German. I studied French. I lived in Italy, and I remember just enough of them all to get me in trouble. I can even get in trouble with English. I remember almost 40 years ago, my friend Father Pat brought a graduate student from Poland over for dinner at the rectory where I was living at the time. Sitting across the table from her, I said slowly and carefully, "Hannah, I am glad you're here. What do you do at the college?" She said to me, "I'm doing research in linguistics. Currently, I'm working on a phenomenon called threshold, when children are able to think and express themselves abstractly." I said to her, "Hannah, I'm glad you're here." Language can be tough. Difficulties in communication are myriad, with language barriers, people coming from different places, speaking different languages. It all goes back to the 11th chapter of the book of Genesis. The fragmentation of peoples occurred when languages were confused after people attempted to construct the Tower of Babel, reaching to heaven. In response to their hubris, God divided the nations by creating multiple languages. Indeed, language can be tough. But there are even greater barriers than geography and language that can separate people. We can find it difficult to communicate with someone who lives across the street or sits across the dining room table. Anger between spouses, mistrust between parents and children, festering grievances between colleagues, disappointment between friends, unkind words between neighbors, all these things can cause division on the personal or micro level. Then there's the macro level with global divisions resulting from ethnic conflicts, political rivalry, religious zealotry, and economic disparity. But in today's first reading from the Acts of the Apostle, Luke indicates that communication with all people is possible when the Holy Spirit takes command. The miracle of Pentecost is the reversal of Babel. It is a miracle of both speaking and hearing, and its meaning is clearly a manifestation of the universal presence and power of the Spirit. The outpouring of the Spirit and the preaching of the gospel to all nations are seen as the reuniting of the human race and the gathering of all into the reign of God. It is the gift of the fullness of the Spirit. The risen Lord has been exalted to his rightful place next to the Father, and he has sent his Spirit to fill the earth with power. The world is charged with divine energy. It needs but a spark to ignite it with life and with excitement. This vitality explodes into the extraordinary. Tongues are loosed and speech overflows its linguistic constraints. Charismatic gifts flood the valleys of human habitation. Barred doors burst open, and frightened hearts are calmed. The Spirit fills the whole world. But if this really happened, why does the world look the same? Why is there so much religious and ethnic rivalry? Why do we continue to make distinctions between Jew and Gentile, slave and free, man and woman, distinctions that favor one at the expense of the other? Why is there so little peace, so little comfort or solace? Why do we refuse to forgive or to be reconciled? Has the face of the earth really been renewed? The great 19th century Jesuit poet Gerard Manley Hopkins addressed this very question in his poem, God's Grandeur. Speaking of the glory of God, he states, "The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil crushed. But then he asks, why do men now not reck his rod? Because, he explains, all is seared with trade, blurred, smeared with toil, and wears man's smudge and shares man's smell. But he concludes, there is still hope. Because the Holy Spirit over the bent world broods with warm breast and bright wings. Pentecost happens. Yes, it happened. It happened almost 2,000 years ago, but it continues to happen. It happens as we begin to emerge from this dreadful season of isolation and fear caused by the pandemic. How much we were like those first disciples, locked away in our homes like them in the upper room. And our breath, unlike the life-giving breath of the Holy Spirit, was toxic and required us to shield our faces lest we contaminate one another. And we longed to be connected, and so we relied upon the Word through text messaging, emails, phone calls, social media, and Zoom meetings. Now, as in the gospel, Jesus breathes on us and says, peace be with you, and sends us out into the world with the strength of the Spirit. We rejoice like the Israelites returning from Babylon, and we echo their praise with the words of Psalm 126. When from our exile God brings us home again, we'll think we're dreaming. But like those first disciples, we are sent out with a purpose to bring the healing, the hope, the peace that the Spirit makes possible to bring this into the world today. Jesus' words in the gospel, whose sins you forgive are forgiven them, and whose sins you retain are retained, are traditionally seen as the locus classicus for the institution of the sacrament of penance. But it's more than just that. It is not just the mission of the 12. Luke says clearly that at Pentecost all were filled with the Holy Spirit. We are all called to preach the good news of God's love and forgiveness. There are so many who will never enter a church or hear a sermon or meet a clergy person, but they will encounter you. And it doesn't matter if some church body has ordained you or not. You will be the one through whom God will come into that person's life. God's Spirit is poured out on all who call on the name of the Lord. The Spirit is poured out this day upon you. You are the hope. You are the promise. You are the future. You are the church. And as I said to Hannah Vysotska 40 years ago, I am so glad you're here.